Hello everybody and welcome back to Jester's Grin. Today we're going to take a deep dive straight into Wolf Creek. Let's jump in, shall we? Ivan Milat was a serial killer who killed at least 7 tourists between 1989 and 1993. These killings became known as the backpack killings. His murders took place in the Belanglo State Forest in the southern part of Australia. The first victims that were found of his were 2 women who were backpacking from Europe and were named Joanne Walters and Caroline Clark. The bodies of these 2 women were found in Belanglo. Walters was found by hikers in a shallow grave and had been stabbed over 14 times. Clark was found a day after Walters and had been shot in the head, presumably being used as target practice by Milat. In 1993, a year after Clark and Walters had been found, a human skull was found by police. This human skull led them to being able to find Deborah Everest and James Gibson, who had also gone missing in 1989. Gibson's spine had been completely severed by a sharp blade, and Everest had been stabbed and then beaten to death. In 1991, German backpackers Anja Habshid and Gabor Najabauer and Simone Shimdel were the next bodies to be found. Habshid was also found in a shallow grave with multiple stab wounds, as well as being decapitated. Since all the backpackers except Simi were traveling in pairs, and 2 of the pairs included men, and one was an ex-soldier, so how in the world did the killer manage to overpower them to begin with? Were there several killers at work here? They drugged the victims? We don't know the cause. But after developing a profile of the killer, the police narrowed the list of suspects to a short list of 230 to an even shorter list of 32 individuals that could be possible suspects, which included the killer. The story of the Paul Onions attempted abduction in Australia. On November 13th, 1993, New South Wales police received a call from Paul Onions from Willenhall in the West Midlands, United Kingdom, who at age 23 had left his engineering job in England to backpack around Australia 3 years before. On January 25, 1990, Paul took a train to the Hume Highway and tried to get to Victoria to earn some money for picking fruit. Whilst hiking along the road, he came across a roadside transport cafe. As he was leaving the car park, a mustache-smiling Australian walked over and, "Where are you heading to, brother? Do you need a lift, mate?" he asked. He told Paul his name. His name was Bill, and he seemed like a genuine and friendly man. So after we set off in his 4-wheel drive, I talked about my family and plans in Australia that I had, and he chatted about the sort of work that he did for a living. He was quite cagey about his job. He really didn't want to speak about it much, and all he would tell me is that he'd spent a lot of time on the road, plenty of time. Bill stopped the vehicle close to the entrance of the Belanglo State Forest, stepped out of the vehicle, and told Onions in the car, "I'm looking sets under the seat," but Paul felt slightly suspicious, so he followed him out of the car using the excuse that he had to stretch his legs. He just got a really creepy vibe about this guy all of a sudden. And after a couple minutes, they both got back in the car, but seconds later, Bill got out again and started rummaging under the seat once again. Bill pulled out a black revolver and pointed the gun straight at Onion's forehead. Then he reached under the seat again and pulled out a bag of rope. At that point, Paul undid his seatbelt and ran for it under gunfire. Bill managed to catch up with Paul and dragged him to the ground. Somehow, Onions managed to get up and make another run for it into the path of an oncoming car driven by Joanne Berry, who was with her sister and 5 children, which fortunately stopped. And as he jumped back into the seat again as they drove off, Paul remembers the gunman standing with a stupid grin on his face, which he could not get out of his head for years. Onions and Joanne Berry managed to get to Barrow Police Station, where they gave detailed information about the attacker's appearance, job, and the type of 4-wheel drive that he was driving. But staff merely handed him $10 to get back to the British High Commission in Sydney, and the report lay filed in a drawer for years. But after reading newspaper reports about the remains of several partially buried bodies having been found in the nearby Belangolo State Forest, Onions called overseas from the United Kingdom to remind the police of the story of his own assault by the mysterious Bill. Unfortunately, his call was missed for 5 months. On the 13th of April 1994, Detective Gordon found the note regarding Onion's call to the hotline 5 months earlier. Superintendent Clive Small immediately called for the original report from Boral Police, but it was missing completely from their files. Fortunately, Constable Janet Nicholson had taken a full report in her notebook, which provided more details than the original statement itself. God is good. Ivan Milat and the Backpacker murders. Based on these reports and the other investigations' work, police finally zeroed in on one man, not called Bill, but a man called Ivan Milat. A man who was of Croatian descent, as his father had immigrated to Australia, but who was very anti-foreigner with forthright views. Ivan Robert Marco Milat was born on the 27th of December 1944 in Guildford, New South Wales, and was the fifth born of 14 children. He was employed as a road worker. Police learned that he had served prison time in 1971 and been charged with the abduction of 2 women and the rape of one of them. On Good Friday in April 1971, Ivan Milat picked up 2 young female hitchhikers near Liverpool train station. He pulled a knife and he bound the girls with rope and told them, "I'm going to kill you. You won't scream. And when I cut your throats, you will no more." He raped one of the girls, who then managed to convince him to stop for cans of Cokes at a service station. With the help of men from inside this petrol station cafe, the girls managed to escape, and Milat takes off in his car. He was arrested later, but facing both rape charges and 2 counts of armed robbery. He faked his own death by leaving his shoes at the Gap, a renowned Sydney suicide spot deep in the woods. Later that year, the police discovered that Milat has fled to New Zealand, but he was rearrested in late 1974 when he had returned to Australia after his mother was taken to hospital, suffering from a heart attack. He managed to escape the conviction of both the rape charges and also the armed robbery counts through a series of police procedural blunders. It was also learned that both he and his brother Richard Milat worked together on road gangs along the highways between Sydney and Melbourne, Australia. That he had owned a property in the vicinity of the Belangolo and had sold a Nissan Patrol 4-wheel drive truck shortly after the discovery of the bodies of Clark and Walters. Acquaintances also told police about Milat's obsession with weapons, knives, and rifles. When the connection between the Belangolo murders and Onions' experience was made, Paul Onions flew to Australia to help with the investigation himself. On the 5th of May 1994, Onions positively identified Milat as the man who had picked him up, the mysterious Bill, and had attempted to tie him up and possibly murder him if he wouldn't have got away that day. The arrest of Ivan Milat. Milat was arrested on May the 22nd, 1994 at his home in Cinnabar Street, Eagle Vale Homes, belonging to his brothers Richard, Alex, Boris, Walter, and Bill were also searched at the time by over 300 police. The search of Ivan Milat's home revealed a cache of weapons, including parts of .22 caliber rifles, 50 cals that matched the type used in the murders, including 9mm pistols, plus clothing, camping equipment, duct tape, rope, and cameras belonging to several of the Belangolo Forest victims. Milat appeared in court on robbery and weapons charges on May the 23rd, 1994. On the 30th of May, following continued police investigations, Malat was also charged with the murders of the 7 backpackers that were found. In March 1996, the trial opened and lasted 15 weeks. His defense argued that in spite of the evidence, there was no proof that he was guilty, and attempted to shift the blame to other members of his family, particularly Richard, his brother. But on the 27th of July 1996, a jury found Malat guilty of the murders. He was also convicted of the attempted murder, false imprisonment, and robbery of Paul Onions. The events following Malat's imprisonment. In 2012, Malat's great-nephew, Matthew Malat, and his friend, Cohen Klein, both aged 19 at the time of the sentencing, were sentenced to 43 years and 32 years in prison, respectively, for murdering David Archuleta on his 17th birthday with an axe at the Belangolo State Forest in 2010. Matthew Malat struck him with the double-headed axe as Klein recorded the attack with a mobile phone. This was the forest where Ivan Malat had killed and buried all of his victims beforehand. Police believe that Malat had been involved in many more murders than the 7 for which he was convicted. In 2001, he was ordered to give evidence as an inquest to the disappearances of 3 other female backpackers, but no case was ever brought forth against him due to lack of evidence. Similar investigations were launched in 2003 in relation to the disappearance of 2 nurses, and again in 2005 relating to the disappearance of hitchhiker Annette Briffa, but no charges resulted. Many believe Malat had helped in killing his 7 victims, with one possible co-conspirator being his sister of all. Judge Justice David Hunt said after Malat's trial he was convinced the killer could not have done these crimes alone, and a juror on the case made similar claims after the trial. Malat's own lawyer pointed at both Malat's brother and his sister, who shared a house with Malat at the time of the killings. One key piece of evidence implicating Malat's sister is that cigarette butts were found near the body of Caroline Clark. Malat was not a smoker, but his sister smoked heavily. Police said they interviewed the sister on several occasions, but had no reason to believe that she was directly involved. In December 2017, Malat unsuccessfully tried to appeal his convictions for the 7th time, and he remained in the Supermax prison in New South Wales until his untimely death in 2019. Ivan Malat, known in his family as Mac, died in Long Bay Jail's hospital wing in New South Wales from terminal esophagus and stomach cancer at about 4 a.m. approximately on Sunday, October the 27th, 2019. He was age 74 at the time of his death. He had been undergoing chemotherapy since first being diagnosed in May 2019 with cancer. The families of some of his victims hoped for a deathbed confession, just praying, to bring some form of closure, but there was none to be had. Malat categorically denied completely being the backpack murderer. When asked again by his family in his dying days, he said he didn't need a priest. He had nothing to confess, but just smiled in contempt. To his dying days, Malat showed no remorse whatsoever, despite overwhelming evidence and several failed appeals. He will not soon be missed. Guys, Jester's Grin. Love y'all. Hope y'all enjoyed the content. Love y'all. Like, subscribe, YouTube, Jester's Grin. Y'all take care. Have a blessed day.